Today, my guest is David Bryngelsson. He is CEO and founder of the Swedish startup CarbonCloud. CarbonCloud calculates the climate impact of food products. They measure the greenhouse gas emissions associated with farming, transporting, processing, packaging food, and then transporting it again to retailers. In this interview, David talks in detail about how they track all these emissions and why it's important to do so. He also talks about his business model and growth plans. David, thank you very much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
David, tell me, what is CarbonCloud?
Yeah, so CarbonCloud is a startup company from Sweden, and we have a platform for assessing and communicating climate footprints with a focus on the food sector. So to facilitate for non-experts to make really thorough assessments of the footprints of their products and then communicating that to their customers. Being if you're a brand owner, that's your customer, would be the end customer. And then you have labels on pack and associated web reports. And if you're somewhere else in the value chain, you assess your part of the value chain and you communicate it on platform to your customers who then use your ingredients in whatever products they produce.
Okay, just to understand, like right from the beginning, I think we need to explain a few concepts, right? So what how do you define climate footprint? Because it's not carbon footprint, it's something else.
The most common word used for this would be carbon footprint, but we prefer the term climate footprint because we think carbon footprint is somewhat misleading. So carbon footprint makes sense in the sense that carbon dioxide is the most common or the biggest problem of the human-induced climate problem. But carbon dioxide is far from the only gas that matters. And for food, typically, it's not the most important one. So for most food products, you have carbon dioxide from transport and refinement and energy usage, but the major part of the footprint comes typically from the agricultural phase, where nitrous oxide is the most common, the biggest contributor, or in some cases you have methane as the biggest contributor. So then saying climate footprint sort of encapsulates all of that. And in most carbon footprint studies, that is also included. But using the term carbon footprint, sometimes people ask, yeah, but what about these other factors? And then we think, yeah, but climate footprints is sort of more to the point, we think.
Okay, does that include all the greenhouse gases?
Yes, so that includes all the greenhouse gases, exactly. And then, I mean, there are some in the energy system, you have some additional greenhouse gases that contribute tiny, tiny factors. But for food, it's nitrous oxide or laughing gas, same gas, or methane and carbon dioxide. Those are the ones that matter.
Okay, and David, how did you come up with CarbonCloud to start with? Tell me a little bit of the story behind it. When was it? I know that you have been researching this field for quite a long time now.
Yeah, so I started as a researcher at Chalmers University of Technology. I did my PhD there, and then I did postdoc there as well. So I did research on climate change mitigation, so sort of understanding the climate problem and sort of working on what can we do about it. And in that research, it became evident to me that sort of you had this whole food space, which is about a quarter of the problem, which was under-researched, and there were much less done there than in sort of transport and energy. Things had already started moving. And so I did a few papers on food and climate change mitigation and realized that, that there is a large potential to reduce emissions from changes in how things are produced. And there is a very large potential for reducing emissions in sort of consumption choices, so what we eat. And as a researcher, I was quite active in public outreach. So I did some media and I did public lectures and similar things. And it became obvious to me that what is holding us back from solving climate change is not a lack of understanding of the physics of climate change or a lack of understanding of the biology associated with food production and climate change, but it was a lack of access to that information by the people who need to make a million little business decisions along the value chain to take us from 2021 having the problem to 2050 having solved the problem. And a fundamental there is that the problem is solvable, and we are not going to stop eating, we're not going to stop consuming. There will be a market also in the future, but to access that market, you need to change things. And then being very interested in communication and sort of communicating difficult science to non-experts, I decided to dedicate my life to doing that. And I teamed up with some people who knew how to start businesses and knew how to write code. And we set out on the mission to take state-of-the-art science, digitize that, put it into a platform where sort of designed for non-experts. So sort of you somewhere like there is really complicated science involved in the calculations, but to be able to sort of model your own production flows and calculate it, you actually don't need to understand the mathematics, and you actually don't need to understand the science behind, but you need to trust it. And that is how we built this. We built this really powerful tool, but the interaction with it is much more like a consumer application, as you'd expect to find of like an iPad type application.
Okay, we're going to get to that tool very soon. But before that, I mean, just the idea of tracking the climate footprint of any product is incredible, because in the food production chain, you have farmers, then you have transportation, then you have processing, then you have transportation again, then you have retail. There's so many links in this chain, and they're spread across the world. So how do you do that?
Yeah, that is sort of a large project to sort of embark on, and there are two sides to this, sort of making this assessment. The first one is that you mentioned, that there are a lot of details and there's a lot of things to keep track of. So making part of the assessment sort of from after the agriculture and onwards, it's not scientifically hard to do, but it's a matter of keeping track on lots of details and making sure that you're consistent in how you calculate things. That is a sort of a technically hard problem, but not a scientifically hard one. And then you have in agriculture, you can say that it's scientifically more difficult, because there it's like the biological mechanisms involved are much trickier. And and sort of our approach is to for say, we can start with the customer journey. So we take a brand, like we have here is an example product with our label on it. Yeah, I don't know if it's easy to see, but there's a climate label on it.
Okay, so for those that are just listening to us, you're holding a package of sausages, right? What are they? Vegan sausages?
Yeah. So these are vegan hot dogs, some sort from actually, yeah. They also make normal meaty sausages, but this one is vegan. And anyway, so there you'd start like by assessing that product or any other product. You start by sort of collecting. You log into our platform and you map out your production process as a brand owner, and then you take the ingredients you need, and normally you take that from our benchmark library. So that would be sort of typical. In this one is based on pea protein, so then you'd have sort of pea protein of some sort, and then you have your transport and refinement and whatever else. I mean, there's probably a long list of ingredients there, and you assess that, and then you need to plug in your primary data for your transport, need of different ingredients, wastage and spoilage levels, and packaging and all of that for your part of the value chain. And then you sort of send it for review. There's a review button. Our experts look over it to make sure that it looks neat and well done. And then you sort of get a thumbs up, approve, and you can publish. And then you can go out and do your marketing campaigns and sort of. So like the incentive to improve propagates down the value chain, because sort of the customers like climate transparency and brands that perform well. And then because the brand owners realize that, this becomes a KPI they want to work on. So their management start caring, their board start caring, and then of course you need to engage your suppliers over time to improve. And then when someone in the supply chain make that investment to reduce their spoilage, change their suppliers or whatever to improve their performance, that propagates through the network, and the climate footprint of the brand product, or sort of every relevant product that builds on their ingredients, get automatically updated, and they can make marketing claims about how they improve and how their awesomeness sort of improves, and they're moving towards this future of solving climate change. And
but David, let me see if I understood. So the one really benefiting from this whole thing is, in the end, the brand, right? That is offering a product that has a number written down on the package and saying, this is our climate footprint. But in order to show that, they need everyone in the supply chain to be in, right? To be supplying this data. But what is the incentive, for example, for a farmer to go through the trouble of doing that?
Yeah, so To take sort of what we do differently than other actors in the carbon accounting space is that there are lots of consultancy firms and platforms, SaaS solutions that do climate emission carbon accounting in various forms. And what they have in common pretty much across the board is that they are compliance focused. So they focus on regulatory compliance or shareholder compliance. So you do work for the sustainability report. And there, of course, they want to minimize that work because it's a cost for the company. And what we sort of coming to or starting to work with this, if we realize if there is going to be a true change, if we're actually going to get the industry to change uh, seriously and solve climate change, it needs to become part of the core business, which means revenue generation. So that's why we went to this, like finding brands who realize that there will be winners and losers in this transition. We want to be part of the winning team. How do we do that? Well, first off, we need to find out where we're at. Then we need to tell our customers that we are working on this. And there we have seen, luckily enough, that the transparency in and of itself drives business. So it drives customer loyalty. And then if we take, like, here I have Oatly, which was one of the first customers we had, and they have like a number. So this pack says 0.29. What does that mean? Is a common question. And there basically the answer is it doesn't really matter as far as sort of getting the value for the marketing crew, because the one assumption we've seen is that if it weren't good, you wouldn't have published it. Secondly, the transparency in and of itself creates value, because then you get trust in this brand. So instead of making some bombastic claims, so we're climate neutral because we plant trees somewhere, they say, hey, we're like a real company with faults. We're working on this issue. We're doing it with you guys, and we do it very honestly, and that creates value. So if you're first in a product category, just doing that sort of creates lots of value. Then if you are second in the same category, so say you're also a dairy alternative and you want to be next to Oatly in the store shelf, like it will matter to you to be lower. So if that one says 0.29, if you're 0.28 and you have a customer going there, you have about 4 seconds to convince them. And this like, hey, yeah, that one's lower. I might try that. Bam, and you gain some market share. And then you get a numbers war, and they start sort of trying to out compete each other. And that's sort of creates this climate change matters. Of course, you need to have a premium product, like it needs to taste good. But there are many alternatives that taste good, and the consumers don't know which ones are good for the climate. And if you are somewhat indifferent between options, and one is better for the climate, you might try it, and that drives business. And then to get that position, you over time need to involve your suppliers. You don't need to do that initially. So we built this so that you can get from sort of, yeah, we want to be part of this, to having something for the marketing and sort of driving that process within the company as rapidly as possible. And there also we want to see the potential customers to sort of to try it themselves, so that you can start with one product. It costs very, very little to get started, and they can see for themselves if it works. And they typically do. They come back very soon after that. Hey, we want to do more products. And then over time they want to improve, and then they involve their suppliers. And then we have like customers on the platform who basically want to pay premium to suppliers who perform better. And the only way to know which suppliers that is to measure them. And then you need to measure all your suppliers to find out who's good and who's bad. And then they can sort of introduce this pricing scheme for how to pay this premium. And then, of course, the suppliers, the ones that aren't as good, are typically, it's not because they don't care, it's typically because they don't know. And then if they have this tool where they get the feedback that if I fertilize this way, or I irrigate that way, or whatever, it drives emissions in certain ways, they can start optimizing for that.
I
And then,
see. So,
yeah.
so if you don't have, let's say you are a brand and you want to start and you don't have your suppliers yet at this level of transparency, so you provide them an estimation. Is that how it works?
Yeah, so in practice, like the customers model their products on our platform. We supply data for their ingredients, but they, of course, need to provide information about the ingredients to the platform for that to work. But so they feed information for the ingredients, and sort of the platform, or sometimes with some human interference, provide the ingredients for them to get going and sort of get results rapidly. And then when you work with that and you have your number, but you see that sort of 60% of our footprint comes from this one ingredient, you get this itch, you sort of want to scratch it, you want to find out more. And that's when you get this network in the supply chain going after a while. And then depending on the food brand and the portfolio size, etc., you might want to sort of focus on getting your full portfolio in first, or you might want to go dig deeper early. And that varies.
Okay, so I assume that that's a quite complicated process, and there's still a bit of controversy regarding what data is really important, how is that measured, how is that audited. So this first data that you provide, that you estimate, what is that based on? That's the first question. And then once you have suppliers in and they can input this information into the program, the web platform, how do you make sure that that information is accurate?
Yeah, very good questions. So if we start with the benchmark data, so we are not as much experts on the food industry as we're experts on climate change and building platforms. So our main thing is to build the infrastructure for everyone else to sort of assess their specific products. But then we plug the platform and the network with benchmark data based on, I mean, there is vast amounts of information out there in published literature, scientific literature, white papers from the industry. You have databases, and if you go like to agricultural part where a lot of it happens, you have these like national inventories of fertilization levels and yield levels, things like that. And there we scratch data from all over to plug it in, and we have this, you can say, quite advanced algorithm for finding the best fit for the data for wherever there are holes in the data. And of course, this differs for different parts of the world, where you have sort of Western Europe and the US, you have quite high quality data, and you go further away, typically the data quality is a little bit worse. And then but we do that, make sure to do that consistently, to be at the very least sort of as good as anyone else or better. And then as more and more primary data gets fed into the platform, it sort of learns and gets better and better data. That's one part. And then for sort of other part in the value chain, we take energy systems, or carbon intensity for electricity from different countries, from different fuel blends, etc. There we have same thing. We go look. There are lots of other sources for that type of information that we feed into the platform. But then we see over time, we'll sort of see more and more of these actors as well, sort of getting plugged in. So you get your supplier of electricity eventually on the platform as well. And then when it comes to the any one customer of ours being sort of a brand owner or their supplier, like we treat them very similarly. It's like they model on the platform. We sort of review the models increasingly by machine doing, so sort of more and more towards real time. And there we can check that it makes sense, that if you have a pasteurization step, that you have enough energy to do that you don't break the laws of thermodynamics. We can make sure that you have sort of reasonable spoilage levels, that there's mass balance through it, etc. But of course, we cannot check if they're lying. If they say we produce this in this factory in Germany, but in reality they have a factory in South Africa, we can't capture that. But there we see, moving towards the future, that there will be a need for auditing here. And that can sort of, we see two different trajectories for that. One is that we do the auditing. So as part of what you pay for is that maybe every 50th product gets an audit every year or something like that randomly. And then we have like this like some consultancy doing auditing sort of as part of the package. That's one solution. Another potential solution is there's something like the tax authorities doing the auditing, that it becomes regulated from the top. Like governments have said we're going to solve the problem. That means that they will need to have some sort of policies in place. There are currently none for the food industry, and there, like for other industries, there's like, various and different policies, but something will need to come. And then we can provide access to the information for select people. And we built it like that from the very start to make sure that there's no data leakage, but we can invite people specifically to access certain types of data for doing audits. Yeah.
Are there other players working in the same direction? I'm asking about, do you have maybe competitors already, other companies that are trying to do that? Do you have regulation coming up? Are there discussions that might kind of lead in that direction? What is the context for what you're doing there? Are you alone?
Both yes and no. So there is no one else that does precisely what we do. And but there is like more and more sort of competitors popping up that do similar-ish things, and like doing climate footprint calculations on specific products, that has been going on for quite some time, but that has historically been done by consultants. You have expert consultants doing it, and there are two problems basically. One is the comparability. If you have two really competent consultants, they will do things slightly differently. So, which is no problem whatsoever if it's for internal use. So someone within a company, they want to learn about their value chain and you're going to sort of report to shareholders, no problem whatsoever. But if you are going to say that we're 5% better than our competitors, you would need to be part of the same study. And typically they wouldn't want that because they don't want to share their data. So that's one of the problems that we solve, that we standardize that. So sort of it's every product becomes part of the same study. And then also for consultants, of course, there's a scalability issue of it being too time consuming and expensive to do it on a really large scale. But then you have some other SaaS platforms that then do software, web-based to do this like more on a scale, but they tend to be much more top down, where you look at sort of a company transactional perspective. So you have you take like economic transactions and you have emission intensities for different types of economic transactions, and you get a very rapidly a pretty good overview of your company. And there are a lot of platforms that are very good at that, but that is still taps into a different type of mechanism than the product specific that will drive revenue. Because regardless how thoroughly you do your company overview, your customers will not read your sustainability reports. They just don't. I mean, you have 4 seconds when they look in the store shelf. That's what you get. And there you need to be very, very specific to be able to do that, because there are some sort of commercial laws when you make such like quantitative claims that you need to be able to back it up. So you need to be thorough, and that entails a different approach. And there I would say that we are fairly alone so far. There are some other ones that are sort of similar-ish, so of course we keep our eyes on them. And if someone turns out to solve this problem better than we do, all good for the climate. And of course, it would be cool if we become the platform to really be the platform in the future. But primary still for me is that it's the best platform as far as scientific integrity and incentive structure, to make sure that sort of the problem becomes optimized in a good way and focus on the right things. And there I'd say most of the other actors have a lot of focus on things that are maybe not the best, such as, for example, climate compensation, which a lot of them do, which I would say typically doesn't work. And that just sort of delays action, and sort of for the companies that do that, they sort of might buy a little bit of time as far as sort of customer relations goes, but it will actually delay the solution of the problem. So we don't do that at all.
Oh, okay. Because they don't focus on optimizing or improving their value chain, their own value chain, or finding where the problems are, but just plant more trees somewhere else. And
Yeah,
that's not part
exactly.
of your calculation, is it? Is it right?
No, it's not part of our calculation, and sort of to the whole sort of topic of climate compensation. It's a large one, but sort of the concise version is: if it were as easy as paying some African countries to plant trees, we wouldn't have been debating climate change for over 30 years without solving it. We would have done that already. And fact of the matter is, historically, deforestation is responsible for a fair chunk of the climate problem, and of course, we need to replant a lot of those trees. But there just isn't enough land to plant trees to cover all of the emissions. we actually have to stop emitting. We have to reduce carbon dioxide. We need to get down to zero, nil, nothing. We need to go all the way. For nitrous oxide and methane, we in practice can't go really all the way to zero, but we need to get down much, 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 much lower than we are. And that has to be done regardless. And then, yeah. So there it's better to focus on the core of the problem and solving that, and then we'll eventually need to plant the trees anyway. But it's like, it's just sort of, I don't know, creative bookkeeping, and saying that some companies are sort of guilt-free because they sort of got those trees in their books. But there are also huge risk of double counting, because say you plant trees in Uganda, and then Uganda will report less emissions because they planted trees. So then you have two different bodies counting the same tree, etc. So that is, it's problematic.
So, David, what I think is interesting in the offer you bring to the market is that you try to translate this whole complexity behind carbon and other greenhouse effect gases accounting, right? And you make that all complexity, you make it all into a number that you show in the packaging of a product. In the beginning of our conversation, you showed me the packaging of Oatly, and it was written there, if I'm not mistaken, 0.29. So can you just explain what the number means? I mean, it's 0.29 kilo CO2e, which is CO2 equivalent, right, per kilo. How are consumers supposed to understand that number?
That's a really good question. And here, there's a question of what does 0.29 kilogram of carbon dioxide mean? First, if it were carbon dioxide, and then carbon dioxide equivalent becomes even more difficult. And of course, sort of, you have these different greenhouse gases. And as I mentioned in the beginning, for the food industry, the ones that matter are carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, and methane. And they behave differently in the atmosphere, where carbon dioxide stay for a very long time in the atmosphere, hundreds and thousands of years. And then you have nitrous oxide that also stay for a very long time in the atmosphere. And you have methane that stay for a few decades. Which, I mean, it sort of breaks down in the atmosphere eventually. And then you have different concentrations of these gases in the atmosphere already. And they this comes to climate physics and quantum mechanics, and vibration modes are different molecules, and depending on how many they are, they will absorb different wavelengths of light. And then you have, so some wavelengths, there is the atmosphere is basically entirely transparent, like visible light. We can't see the atmosphere, right? And then you have some wavelengths where it's basically opaque. Nothing gets through, where you have water vapor, which is a really important greenhouse gas that we do not influence directly. And then you have carbon dioxide, which we have a fair amount of, so it's sort of quite opaque, but not entirely, a bit transparent. So you add a bit more carbon dioxide, and there is this a little bit less sort of infrared radiation in that wavelength spectrum gets through. And then you have nitrous oxide and methane, where you have much less of them. So an additional molecule will make a bigger impact, right? And this all is complicated. So here we're at sort of the really the hardcore physics part of it, but it's well understood, and it has been understood for a long time. But then sort of, how do we regulate this? Everyone can't do PhDs in physics, right? We need to solve this in some other way. And there, one way is to sort of translate the emissions of the different gases to a common metric. And the most commonly used one is global warming potential with a 100-year time span. We could spend an entire podcast episode or more on that, but let's not. But it's sort of it's a good metric for capturing the damage done by emissions, right? And there I would say, so if we emit a bit of nitrous oxide, if a few, say, grams of that, how much carbon dioxide would we need to emit to get the same amount of warming? And there you have the carbon dioxide equivalent emissions. So if you say you have 5 grams of nitrous oxide, then you need to have 300 times that in carbon dioxide for it to have the same amount of warming, right? So that is we express it in carbon dioxide equivalent to boil it down to one sort of amount. And then if you have 0.29 kilograms of carbon dioxide, that is an amount of gas. You could fill a balloon with that. And you have I don't know if you're audience will be primarily in the US or outside, but if you take 1 cubic meter of air, that weighs about 1 kilogram. Carbon dioxide is a little bit heavier, but that's sort of the amount of gas actually emitted, right? So, and then if you have 0.29, then it's just that would be in carbon dioxide. If it were carbon dioxide, about 200 liters or so of gas actually emitted to the atmosphere. And then sort of you can think about how large is the atmosphere, how big a sort of contribution would that be. But that still doesn't tell you much of the damage. But it's still sort of a metric. And this is what boils down to. It's very measurable and it's very, very well understood. But then what is good and what is bad? Like, yeah, for carbon dioxide, we need to get to zero. And for other sort of food, we can't get to zero, but we need to get very low. And depending on how low we need to get for food will depend on how quickly we can decarbonize the energy system and the transport sector and other things. But then if we come back to the person looking at this number who hasn't done a PhD in physics or any of that and needs to make some sort of sense of it, well, as Oatly have done then is to compare it to cow's milk, because that's what they see as their primary competitor. And then cow milk would be somewhere between 1 to 1.5, depending on where you're in the world or what type of fat content, etc. So 1 to 1.5 roughly. And then you have about 0.3 for Oatly. So that is, yeah, much lower. Okay, yeah, so it's much lower. And then what is good and bad, like, will depend on the product, of course, and if you were drinking that instead of water, of course, it would be terribly bad, because water is, I mean, from the tap, it's zero basically. But if you drink that instead of water, you're going to eat a bit less, because you get a bunch of energy from drinking that. So then you maybe have some less something else. And it's the same, like if you go to a grocery store, you have these per kilogram prices or per whatever pound, maybe if you're in the US then. And there will sort of guide you to what is expensive and what's not. But still, you know that the potatoes, the olive oil, and the steak will provide different services to you. But you still have some sort of budget that entails all of it. How much money will you spend on food? And it's the same thing here. And over time, just like when you look at it and it says also 2.8% fat, it says here, that says something to you. You know that, okay, that's not skinny milk, but it's not so bad, it tastes better. And I think we'll get there. Like when you see the per kilogram prices, or sort of the comparative prices, and you see the fat content and for climate, we will probably get there, where you get over time a feeling for, yeah, this is sort of all right. This is within my conscious budget. Yeah.
I see. But David, so just coming back to the 8.29, if you see that in the supermarket, that means that product caused that amount of green gas emissions per kilogram of the product that you're consuming.
Yes.
That's what that means. And then ideally, the best way to use it would be to compare it with similar products. So Oatly did it, comparing to cow milk. But ideally, in the future, you would have several products in the same category that would all have that information. Then you would be able to see, okay, brand A cares much more about the environment, is doing much more than brand B.
Yeah, that's one way of phrasing it. Like, yeah, so if we start with sort of, we could just say a word of what's included. So you have this like 1 kilogram of this product in the grocery store. That is then the emissions associated with getting it to the store, packaging it, producing it with all the steps, and you have sort of suppliers that do things and you have the spoilage levels, and you might have byproducts that's sold to someone else, and you have all the nitty-gritty details. That's included, and it boils down to, yeah, this is the total for this product. And that will be different for different markets and different products, etc. And whether to compare to similar products, I would say yes and no, because like what you want to compare to, I'd say we don't want to interfere in what you're comparing it to. Say that you personally want to reduce your climate footprint, and then you include a bunch of decisions in that. One is where to live, how to live, which temperature to have inside your house in the winter, how to get to work, what to eat. And then maybe sort of depending on where you live and what type of person you are, you'd feel that sort of not driving to work, but riding a bicycle would be a very significant cost to you. But switching from sort of eating, I don't know, beef to eating vegan hot dogs would be at close to zero cost for you. Then sort of, yeah, you could do that. And then of course for the transport, you could get a Tesla, say, but that's quite expensive. Whereas switching what you eat typically is a zero sum. I mean, it costs you nothing, or maybe a little bit depending on what type of product you want. But there is sort of these things interact, and they are, from a climate perspective, truly comparable to each other. And then if you want milk in your coffee, the choice might be exactly between cow's milk and oat milk or some pea or almond milk or whatever. And then if they taste equally good to you or good enough, you might go for the lower emitting one. But maybe the choice, what you're choosing between is something entirely different. Maybe you're thinking of, yeah, so I'll have this milk on my porridge, or I stop eating porridge and then I don't need milk at all, but instead I'll eat, I don't know, bread or whatever. And so I think there is a need to be able to do within food cross product type comparisons. Because if you're going to change how you eat, you need to get the tools to be able to do that. And then like this sort of talking about changing how people eat, it's a sort of toxic topic, as it were, because it's sort of culturally sort of deep into our culture. It's very, very sensitive. But if you look at how rapidly it changes, it's incredible. Like some of the most common things we eat here now, I would say my parents have never tried. And we think, yeah, it's like we live in Sweden. Yeah, we eat Swedish food. And now it turns out like tacos is like one of the top 10, and sushi is also on the top 10 list of what we eat here. And like 30 years ago, no one ate that. And this process is happening everywhere, where we are rapidly changing. So including this parameter in how we change, there's nothing strange in that. And also, one thing, like two things that are important for climate change connected to this is that typically you don't really need to give much up, because most things you like and eat are really not a climate problem. And also, typically it won't cost you, because oftentimes the switch will not be more expensive. So it's like just a matter of sort of learning.
Sure, and being able to compare things, right? So, as far as I
Yeah,
understood, the way you see this is as a tool to empower lifestyle choices, right?
yeah.
Including not only what you eat, but how you behave in this world, kind of.
Mm.
David, I want to get into the business strategy side of CarbonCloud. So, first of all, how are you funded? Have you been through several funding rounds? Who are your investors? Tell me about it.
Yeah, so we at the inception of the company in the beginning, we got a lot of sort of support from various local sort of public support systems for startups, which I think is absolutely amazing that they exist. Without them, it wouldn't have happened, and were quite significantly funded by an accelerator called Climate Kick, EU funded project, amazing, sort of to getting that sort of non-diluting funding for the early stages before any proper business model is proven. So that's how we started. And then as per last summer, so almost a year ago, we closed our pre-seed round, the first one. We took in 1 million euros to start scaling things up. And that one was led by a Finnish VC called Maki and a German sort of micro VC or super angel group called TS Ventures. And now we are again sort of in a fundraising mode to scale things up more, because sort of we have shown that there is definitely a market for this. We have had very rapid growth this last year, and we need to, yeah. It seems like the market is looking for this, and the world is big, and we need to be more people to to supply it to everyone.
How much are you trying to raise?
Now, 3 million euros to take us through the next 18 months to prepare for an A round, where we are intend to be sort of at a pure SaaS level, so our customers sort of can do this entirely without human interference. So it's truly scalable, and then we'll sort of do a very bigger round and a market push. Really, that's the plan.
Tell me about your size. How many employees do you have?
So we're in Gothenburg, Sweden. We're 15 people right now, but we are now looking. We're expanding, so we're recruiting now, and the plan is to basically double the team before the end of the year.
I see. And can you tell me about revenues or number of clients? Can you disclose some of that?
Yeah. So per yesterday, I think we are 35 different customers right now. And we have had a 20% month-over-month growth in revenue since September last year. And now we are a bit over 20,000 euros in monthly revenue,
Hmm.
recurring monthly revenue.
I see. Tell me a bit about your clients. You mentioned Oatly,
Mhm.
which, if I'm not mistaken, was your first big client. What are the other ones?
So yeah, Oatly is yeah, a very good early client to get. We get sort of when I was thinking about, or when we were thinking about this business idea, I approached them. I talked to them like a year earlier about something else, and then I sort of approached them and sort of pitched this idea, and they apparently was very well aligned with what they wanted at the time, and that has turned out to be a very fruitful collaboration, I would say. Then we have, I'd say, the vast majority of our customers have not yet gotten to the label stage, and they don't want us to disclose their names just yet, which is, of course, like we wish we could, but there are a lot of names you will have heard about. But we have, it's like this one, as I showed you before, the hot dogs, it's called Piece of Heaven. And they are right now running a campaign. So every bus stop all over at least our city is entirely covered with their campaigns, which is awesome. And with our logos on it, which is, of course, amazing. Then we have, for example, here, we have another potato chips, Estrella, that also run. Here we have our label on there. And then we have another one is Tenzing, a UK-based soft drink company that are also sort of doing this. And then a bunch more really great ones. And like what we are primarily now looking for, sort of not too big companies that are sort of have a rapid decision-making process, are preferably growing, and sort of understand that the market is changing now. We can be we can use that to be part of the winning team. And yeah, so we sort of get to this labeling because we see, like, over time, sort of a lot of the change will happen internally in the companies. But we have seen that the ones that brag the most get the most approved, and it sort of permeates the company, where the climate footprint, when it becomes part of their brand, it's something that everyone in the company starts to think about and want to learn more. So we also get, like, from these companies we worked with for a while, they really start, like, they want to learn. And some of them, I will basically said that they should almost go back to university and take courses in this, because they really want to learn the nitty gritty, which I think is amazing. And there, like, our approach to that is to sort of to on our webpage and the web reports associated, to explain it in a very sort of everyday language without the science lingo, but then have sort of more and more sort of text for the ones who want to go dig down, sort of down the rabbit hole and learn, to go sort of to answer all the questions there. And so we're continuously adding to this sort of resource base to educate the ones who want to learn, but also boil it down to make it very easily comprehensible, the core of it, for the ones who sort of trust it anyway, or just want to sort of get the data they need to sort of know what's better.
And David, what is your business model? I've seen on the website you seem to have a subscription
Yeah.
model. How does that work? Why did you go for it?
Yeah, so it's a subscription model. You pay for the platform and how much you pay. So you pay monthly, and how much you pay will depend on the number of products you have on the platform and on how many markets you sell. And the idea there is that the value accrued to the company happens in their interaction with the customers. and then we basically we create a value for the customers, and we take a chunk of that. And also, the reason for doing subscription, sort of at the start, we realized that you have these consultants to do this life cycle assessments to get the climate footprints, and there was a frustration within the food industry for that being slow and expensive. And we had in research previously done these sort of loads of parallel such assessments, and figured that, hey, we could do this so much cheaper and still without losing any of the accuracy. And then we first off just thought, okay, let's try that, and we just sort of price ourselves at 10% of the going rate. And we did that initially, and that worked. But then it turned out that our customers came back and they asked questions. And when they were talking to the customers, or they wanted to learn more about the products, or they wanted to update, etc., we figured, hey, we think a subscription works better, because also then, since sort of labeling the product, the initial assessment, like you need to do that to know where you're at. But that is truly just the starting point from getting to solving climate change and into the future. So it is a process that starts with a label and then becomes, or permeates, the product planning, procurement, all these things to sort of, and then paying a subscription makes a lot of sense. And it also makes it very easy to try. So for a customer or a brand who don't know if it's for them, it won't cost them much to try it. And of course, for us, if customers try it for one product and then drop out, it's not going to be a very good deal. But that doesn't happen.
I see.
They seem to like it.
And this calculation is not something you do once, you keep doing it the whole time, because you're either adding new data or changing a supplier or so forth and so on.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So as long as you want to communicate externally, you need something to back it up with, and then you need the report. And we do that. We back you up with those claims as long as you have a running subscription. But included in that is that they are obliged to, of course, update anything when they make changes. So if something changes in how they produce, they need to update it. And also, we keep the background systems up to date. So, for example, every year there's new yield data coming in. So we update that. And then you have changes in, like, the electricity systems change over time, fuel blends for transport change over time, etc. We keep all that up to date. So the numbers, like, get updated. So our reports, they always have this sort of the most up-to-date numbers on them. And
And David, my last question to you. So what is your vision to the company, and also what are possible new areas of revenue, for example? Because I imagine, I mean, you're building this huge database and, talking to other industries. That's the kind of thing they want to have access to for all kinds of reasons. I mean, just in the banking industry, for example, they are interested in knowing, okay, where is the real or the biggest climate impact in a value chain, because they're funding these companies, and they are obliged now for several reasons to put more attention into ESG investments. So just one example of what could be done with this database. Is that something you think of monetizing in the future? And talking about a vision for the company, how do you see it in the next, let's say, 5 to 10 years?
Yeah. With the sort of risk of sounding a bit bombastic, we see that, like, if we are going to solve climate change, we need to measure. And currently, like, within definitely the food industry, very badly, but also in other industries, I would say that measurement is a problem. Communicating data is a problem. And there, it is hampered for several reasons. One is there's a lack of agreement on how to measure, and also lack of sort of which data sources should you use, and which formats should you report data. And here, we can get past the discussion on how to do it and start talking about what is being done about it. And to do that, we need to get to a single source of truth as for how it should be done. And that how it should be done can be done in different ways, of course, but it needs to be the same. And here we have built a system that is internally consistent and is scalable to the point where everyone could be on that platform. And we think that is beneficial for the world. and also for the industry, for everyone, just have to report in one place and get the learning they need from that place. So we start with food. We see definitely the possibility to go into other verticals over time. When we'll do that, it's not a technical decision, because we could do that on the platform basically already, but it's a business decision, and we'll see when the time is good for doing that. Or maybe it's not necessary because someone else solves other industries. We'll see. But so there, it's like having every producer on the platform is where we're aiming, including like all from every producer, like every farmer, to the largest conglomerates within food. And then, of course, the packaging and logistics, etc., is associated with that. I don't know if 5 years is enough to get there, but that's basically where we're aiming. And then when it comes to other revenue, so we already have customers who use our platform in their procurement and basically deciding where should we build factories, where should we source from. And there we have like large business decisions, and that creates huge value, which we currently don't monetize. And we see a potential for that. And also sort of when everyone agrees, yes, let's measure. Now, how will we move forward? There is, of course, a significant sort of value generating machine there that can be done in the right way. And we are not primarily doing this for the money, but we're doing this because we think like for the challenge, and we want to do something important and something good, etc. But of course, we need to earn money to be able to scale it and sustain it and hire the people we need, etc. So like where we create value, we should of course charge reasonably for that. And we see several such things that where we'll sort of moving forward, we'll investigate sort of what is the best pricing strategy for it to be truly sustainable and interesting for us and the users of the platform. But one thing that we have differently from basically everyone else is that we keep the data openly available. So on the webpage, you can search our data, because we think that sort of hiding the results behind paywalls, I don't think is the best strategy, but rather, so our idea here is like, if you want to be in the dataset, you become a customer. If you want to look at the dataset, you're not a customer. So you can go to our webpage and search the data there.
Okay, so that's not monetized and will not be.
No, so we have we're in the process of designing an API for third-party applications to search our network and search for data. And there's like, because we get lots of questions of these like app builders that have like scanners or whatever for sort of looking at products. And there is like, most of these are not in the business of creating the primary data. They just want to look at it. And there we see that if everyone uses that and they just reference back to us, they will create this image of there's a single source of truth. This is where you should keep your data, right? So that creates value for us and for them, and there is like no losers really in that collaboration. Then of course, if we have users of this API that would be very large, say if like one of the major retail chains would do that and they have like a million searches every day, whatever, then that is probably reasonable to charge for. But there we'll sort of see which type, like if you're a startup and you're building a web page, like no, we won't charge for that. But if you become the dominant actor, yes, then it's reasonable to have some sort of business deal.
Perfect. David, thank you so much for your time. It was a lovely conversation. Best of luck.
Thank you. Lots of good questions. Really nice talking to you.